Welcome to Bite at a Time Books Behind the Story, where we answer the questions you have about your favorite classic authors. What inspired your favorite author to write their novels? What was going on in the world at the time? Follow along with us as we tell you what was happening in the world while your favorite authors wrote your favorite classics. My name is Bree Carlile, and I love to read, and wanted to share my passion with listeners like you. If you want to know what's coming next and vote on upcoming books, sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com. Be sure to follow my show on your favorite podcast platform so you get all the new episodes. You can find most of our links in the show notes, but also our website biteatatimebooks.com includes all of the links for our show, including to our Patreon to support the show and YouTube where we have special behind the narration of the episodes. We're part of the Bite at a Time Books Productions Network. If you'd also like to hear a book by the author, check out the Bite at a Time Books podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Today we'll be talking about the political life and exile of Victor Hugo. After 3 unsuccessful attempts, Hugo was finally elected to the Académie Française in 1841, solidifying his position in the world of French arts and letters. A group of French academicians, particularly Etienne de Jouy, were fighting against the Romantic Evolution and had managed to delay Victor Hugo's election. Thereafter, he became increasingly involved in French politics. On the nomination of King Louis-Philippe, Hugo entered the upper chamber of Parliament as a pair de France in 1845, where he spoke against the death penalty and social injustice, and in favor of freedom of the press and self-government for Poland. In 1848, Hugo was elected to the National Assembly of the Second Republic as a conservative. In 1849, he broke with the conservatives when he gave a noted speech calling for the end of misery and poverty. Other speeches called for universal suffrage and free education for all children. Hugo's advocacy to abolish the death penalty was renowned internationally. When Louis Napoleon seized complete power in 1851, establishing an anti-parliamentary constitution, Hugo openly declared him a traitor to France. He moved to Brussels, then Jersey, from which he was expelled for supporting L'Homme, a local newspaper that had published a letter to Queen Victoria by a French Republican deemed treasonous. He finally settled with his family at Hauteville House in St. Peter, Port Guernsey, where he would live in exile from October 1855 until 1870. While in exile, Hugo published his famous political pamphlets against Napoleon III, Napoleon le Petit, and History d'un crime. The pamphlets were banned in France, but nonetheless had a strong impact there. He also composed or published some of his best work during his period in Guernsey, including Les Miserables and 3 widely praised collections of poetry. However, Victor Hugo said in Les Miserables, "The wretched moral character of Thénardier, the frustrated bourgeois, was hopeless. It was in America what it had been in Europe. Contact with a wicked man is sometimes enough to rot a good deed and cause something bad to come out of it. With Marius's money, Thénardier became a slave trader." Like most of his contemporaries, Hugo justified colonialism in terms of a civilizing mission and putting an end to the slave trade on the Barbary coast. In a speech delivered on 18 May 1879, during a banquet to celebrate the abolition of slavery, in the presence of the French abolitionist writer and parliamentarian, Victor Hugo, Hugo declared that the Mediterranean Sea formed a natural divide between ultimate civilization and utter barbarism. Hugo declared that God offers Africa to Europe. Take it. And in the 19th century, the white man made a man out of the black. In the 20th century, Europe will make a world out of Africa. This might partly explain why, in spite of his deep interest and involvement in political matters, he remained silent on the Algerian issue. He knew about the atrocities committed by the French army during the French conquest of Algeria, as evidenced by his diary, but he never denounced them publicly. However, in Les Miserables, Hugo wrote, "Algeria too harshly conquered, and as in the case of India by the English, with more barbarism than civilization." After coming in contact with Victor Hugo, a writer who fought for the abolition of slavery and French colonialism in the Caribbean, he started strongly campaigning against slavery. In a letter to American abolitionist Maria Weston Chapman on 6 July 1851, Hugo wrote, "Slavery in the United States. It is the duty of this republic to set such a bad example no longer. The United States must renounce slavery, or they must renounce liberty." In 1859, he wrote a letter asking the United States government, for the sake of their own reputation in the future, to spare abolitionist John Brown's life. Hugo justified Brown's actions by these words: "Assuredly, if insurrection is ever a sacred duty, it must be when it is directed against slavery." Hugo agreed to diffuse and sell one of his best-known drawings, Les Pendus, in homage to John Brown. One could keep alive in souls the memory of the liberator of our black brothers, of this heroic martyr, John Brown, who died for Christ just as Christ. Only one slave on earth is enough to dishonor the freedom of all men. So the abolition of slavery is at this hour the supreme goal of the thinkers. Victor Hugo, 17 January 1862. As a novelist, diarist, and member of Parliament, Victor Hugo fought a lifelong battle for the abolition of the death penalty. The Last Day of a Condemned Man, published in 1829, analyses the pang of a man awaiting execution. Several entries in Things Seen, the diary he kept between 1830 and 1885, convey his firm condemnation of what he regarded as a barbaric sentence. On 15 September 1848, 7 months after the Revolution of 1848, he delivered a speech before the Assembly and concluded, "You have overthrown the throne. Now overthrow the scaffold." His influence was credited in the removal of the death penalty from the constitutions of Geneva, Portugal, and Colombia. He had also pleaded for Benito Juarez to spare the recently captured emperor, Maximilian I of Mexico, but to no avail. Although Napoleon III granted an amnesty to all political exiles in 1859, Hugo declined, as it meant he would have to curtail his criticisms of the government. It was only after Napoleon III fell from power and the Third Republic was proclaimed that Hugo finally returned to his homeland in 1870, where he was promptly elected to the National Assembly and the Senate. He was in Paris during the siege by the Prussian army in 1870, famously eating animals given to him by the Paris Zoo. As the siege continued and food became ever more scarce, he wrote in his diary that he was reduced to eating the unknown. During the Paris Commune, the revolutionary government that took power on 18 March 1871 was toppled on 28 May. Victor Hugo was harshly critical of the atrocities committed on both sides. On 9 April, he wrote in his diary, "In short, this commune is as idiotic as the National Assembly is ferocious. From both sides, folly." Yet he made a point of offering his support to members of the commune, subjected to brutal repression. He had been in Brussels since 22 March 1871, when in the 27 May issue of the Belgian newspaper, Independence, Victor Hugo denounced the government's refusal to grant political asylum to the communards threatened with imprisonment, banishment, or execution. This caused so much uproar that in the evening a mob of 50 to 60 men attempted to force their way into the writer's house, shouting "Death to Victor Hugo! Hang him! Death to the scoundrel!" Hugo, who said a war between Europeans is a civil war, was a strong advocate for the creation of the United States of Europe. He expounded his views on the subject in a speech he delivered during the International Peace Congress, which took place in Paris in 1849. Here he declared, "Nations of the continent will, without losing your distinctive qualities and glorious individuality, be blended into a superior unity and constitute a European fraternity, just as Normandy, Brittany, Burgundy, Lorraine have been blended into France. This new state would be administered by a great sovereign senate which will be to Europe what the Parliament is to England." Because of his concern for the rights of artists and copyright, he was a founding member of the Association Littéraire et Artistique Internationale, which led to the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works. However, in Paver's published archives, he states strongly that any work of art has two authors: the people who confusingly feel something, a creator who translates these feelings, and the people again who consecrate his vision of that feeling. When one of the authors dies, the rights should totally be granted back to the other, the people. He was one of the earlier supporters of the concept of domaine public payant, under which a nominal fee would be charged for copying or performing works in the public domain. And this would go into a common fund dedicated for helping artists, especially young people. Thank you for joining Bite at a Time Books Behind the Story today. Again, my name is Bree Carlile, and I hope you come back next time when we answer more questions about one of your favorite classic authors. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com. Check out the show notes or our website biteatatimebooks.com for the links for our show.